Hi, Nick. So, yeah, you can see already, everybody, that we have a lovely picture here, which is going to help us explain what we mean. So we say domains that are core to your business and product strategy. So, Nick, what do you mean then? Jump in. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what this picture really means?
Hey, Emma. So I guess if anyone was watching Scott's talk, there's quite a few parallels here. Core supporting and generic is terminology from the world of domain-driven design, which has evolved in parallel to, let's say, business architecture and business capabilities that Scott was just talking about. So a core domain is an area of your business in which your ability to build differentiation over your competitors is greater than parts of your business where it's not. So this example here is a core domain chart, and you can see a core domain is towards the top right-hand corner. So it's not just about differentiation, it's also about complexity. So if something's important to your business, but it's not a very complex problem to solve, it's probably easy for your competitors to copy and it's not so defensible. Supporting domains are parts of your business which there's value to building them. They might be necessary things that support your core domains, or they might be standalone things, but doing them better than your competitors doesn't mean you'll get more success than your competitors. And then generic domains are things that you find in many businesses, things which are commodities, as Scott was talking about, just things like payment systems, CRM systems, stuff that you can usually buy off the shelf.
Okay. And just to call out as well, whilst we're chatting, do ask any questions if you want to dig into this a bit more. Anyone from the audience, jump in questions and we'll chat about them as we go. Can you give us an example then of I get that, and I like that balance of like stuff that differentiates and the complexity and be able to map it out. Have you got some examples then of what you mean and what those things might be?
Sure, here's one I made earlier. So
Oh, is it? I imagine.
let's take the industry of e-scooters. So pretty much, I think everyone's familiar with them now. You see the scooters on the streets, you scan the QR codes, and then you start riding the scooter. So if you imagine a company in this industry, what might be differentiating for them? What might be their core domains, for example? So in this example, I would say that the kind of competitive advantage this company gets is a comparative advantage. All of the scooters are the same, the mobile apps are the same, you can't really differentiate on features. So it's about doing things cheaper, being able to offer cheaper prices to your customers and being able to generate more profits from the same efforts as a company. So there's two things which can help here. So from the customer perspective, it's about having a cheaper price. So you might think, oh, having a cheaper price is the core domain. Pricing's the core domain, but differentiating is what enables you to offer the cheaper prices. So in this example, I've picked, this isn't based on a real company, this is hypothetical. I've got two examples of core domains here. So the first one is fleet placements. If you can put your scooters in the right place where you know people want to use them, you can generate the same profits from less investment, from having to own and invest in fewer scooters. Whereas if you don't have a good strategy or a fleet placement strategy, you need to buy more scooters and put them in more places, kind of like a brute force approach. So that's one core domain. By being able to get more utilization out of fewer scooters, you can operate more effectively, keep your costs down. And then also maintenance. So if you, let's say for a company like this, owning a fleet of scooters and keeping them healthy and working and usable by customers is expensive. If you can keep those maintenance costs down, you can build a comparative advantage. So it can be things like you've invented some amazing new way of identifying a damage about to happen before it happens. Like, oh, we collect like millions and billions of data points from sensors on the scooter, and we know that when we see certain patterns, a failure is about to happen. So if we apply some small fix early, it can save the whole scooter being broken and having to replace the whole thing. So that's all very theoretical. Someone who works in that industry might disagree. So
Okay, but the key is though is using it to drive decisions, and it like that the example you gave is the kind of decision that you might use it for. But I guess is that what it comes down to? Is then you map that out and you can start to understand it, and then how do you use that then in a practical sense?
yeah, so I guess firstly, as you said, it's about thinking about what kind of competitive advantage are you trying to gain as a company. In this example, it was a comparative advantage. So now we want to understand, out of all of the domains in our business, which ones do we need to invest in to build that competitive advantage. So what I think is that, let's say the next step is thinking about all of the domains in your company and how you might evolve all of them. I'd probably say actually two things. The first thing I would say is, I would say it as a general trend across all companies working in software development, I think we've got good at having agile teams who are able to iterate quickly, working in small iterations, continuous delivery, for example. I think what's been missing is connecting to the strategy. So I think a tool like this, just for being able to think strategically about what you're working on and the domains, is in and of itself a way to build that strategic muscle. But then what I'm showing here is how you can look at your whole estate as a portfolio. So for all of the domains your company is investing in and building capabilities in, how might you want to evolve your landscape? And you can see what we've got here is options about how we evolve as a company. So, for example, domain G on the right-hand side, by investing in that domain, it becomes more complex because you're solving a more complex business problem. You're solving a harder problem, so that's essential complexity. So that's one option. Another option is, we could invest in reducing the complexity of domain B. So domain B is only supporting, but it's very complex. And typically there's a correlation between the more complex something is, the more effort to support it and the more people needed to support it. So with domain G, we want to make it more complex because we can exploit the business opportunity of solving a harder problem. But with domain B, we've got accidental complexity there. It doesn't need to be that complex. So by making it simpler, we can reduce that investment in that domain and perhaps put more people in domain G, for example. So looking at the whole landscape, how would we like to evolve each of our domains? This is our strategic options. And then from here, we'll make some choices about where to invest.
So as you're impacting those things, then you would expect them to change. So as you're increasing complexity of one thing or investing in another, how you say evolving that landscape, how fixed is that view then? How often do you see that evolving and changing?
Well, I think that's a great question for a couple of reasons. If you think about Wardy Mapping, and so this is kind of a simpler version of Wardy Mapping that brings complexity into the picture a bit more. In Wardy Mapping, there's two kinds of evolution. There's climatic patterns, which are basically everything's evolving. Even if you don't do anything, these things will evolve. Your competitors will build new innovations that make your core domain obsolete. And software systems naturally just get more complex over time anyway, even just with BAU adding small features. So your domains are always evolving. And what this presents is also a chance to anticipate how they will evolve and think about how would you like to purposefully change them yourself, deliberately change them rather than just happening automatically.
Okay.
So I've got an example here. I was just going to quickly show you of
Yeah.
how you might use this. So this is an example of a company. This one is based on a real example, but I've changed some of the details. So basically, this company is pivoting to a new business model, and they're scaling from, let's say, 50 to 200 engineers. So the practices that they've been applying up until this point won't work at the next scale, needs a bit more autonomy and ownership. And so there are some options here. Do they just go straight into their new core domains and make them awesome? Or do they fix their supporting domains first? in this case, it was identified that the core domains depend on the supporting domain. In order to add new features in the core domains, you need to add new features in the supporting domain as well. Therefore, by fixing the supporting domain first and having a team owning that and loving it and cleaning it up, it will make it much easier in the future to then add features in the core domains.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess one of the first questions that jumps out to me, though, as I'm looking at it is, I guess it could be quite subjective as to where you're going to put stuff. Is it how data oriented is the positioning of these things on the map or on your grid?
Oh,
Um, and the investment of time in doing it, how big a deal is it to try and to map out all that stuff?
yeah, I mean, it's super subjective. I think you can collect data to inform these decisions, but in terms of deciding how complex is something, a lot of this is betting on the future. I think strategy is betting on the future. So you can definitely look at existing code bases and look at things like how many engineers are working on a typical system. What's the lead time for building a new feature? That can help you to map out the accidental complexity. You can also look at manual processes, like how many people are involved, how many Excel spreadsheets are involved, and that can give you an idea of all the complexity in the manual steps. In terms of how complex is a business problem to solve, I guess Cynefin useful there. Is it a simple domain or is it a complex domain? That will be more essential complexity. But to your point, I think it's very subjective. But I would say that the benefit of doing this is strategy is subjective. You try and get as much data as possible, but at least with a tool like this, we can all visualize the subjectiveness in our heads and try and come to a common agreement and get some alignment there.
It does
In terms
really
of
lay it
when you
out
would,
clearly.
sorry, yeah.
And just say how clearly it lays it out, very easy to sort of swarm around and understand it. I guess I'm interested as well in who you would involve in building that. Is this just one person sit down and do it? Is it as many people as possible and swarm around it? How do you get to a point where you've got a map that you agree on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this tool like this is useful in different situations at different levels of scale. So the recent example, it was me, my colleague, and we were working with a couple of heads of engineering. In other situations, you might have a larger group of people. So I think it's always good to have more people involved, to have more dissent, to have more variety of opinions, to have a mixture of people at the top of the organization, but also people at the bottom. Because if you look at this core domain chart, it's really two things. On the x-axis, the differentiation is more people who understand the business talking about how valuable something could be. But the complexity is really an engineering decision. How much effort is involved to build and maintain this thing? So this is really requires input from both different perspectives on this one. So that's why having more people involved is better. I wouldn't really put a time frame on it how often you should do this. It's not a ritual, I guess. Whenever you think it's useful, but I would encourage heads of engineering or CTOs to have a quarterly update, which contains a document like this talking about here's how we anticipate our domains evolving. Here's our current view of our core domains. So I think once a quarter is a nice cadence.
Okay. And I guess as well, how are people going to decide? So if somebody wanted to do this for themselves, I guess how did they get started? But how are you going to decide what to put on the grid when you is it think it's going to be instinctive from the business that they're already in, or what's a good candidate, what's a bad candidate for actually deciding where it sits on your grid?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that feeds into another part of domain-driven design, which is figuring out your domain boundaries. In order to get to the stage where you know which domains to put on your core domain charts, either you look at the current business and the current organization structure and the current software architecture, and you map what's there now, or you can run a session called event storming, where you map out your business processes end to end, and then you chop them down. You break your event storm up into different domains,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use that to put on here. That could be your ideal future state.
Have you got an example of what I guess what's not a good candidate if you want to try and steer people? Is there a right and wrong or a best way of doing it?
Um, I don't think there's a right and a wrong in general, but I think what we're trying to do at this level is talk about domains and business capabilities, things in business language. So probably wouldn't put, let's say, the payments API on here. We're not
Right.
really talking about technical components. We're talking about the conceptual areas of the business. The technical components you build are just implementations of your business capabilities. So I'd keep this very much focused in the language of your business.
Okay. We've got about 4 minutes left if there are any questions that people want to pose to Nick as well as we're going through. Have you got any examples, any mistakes that people have made as they're trying to, or the impact of using this, or where it's been really beneficial, maybe in the organisation that you've been working with for it?
So I think a technique like this is beneficial um, to map out the subjectivity, like we spoke about before. Um, if you say to someone, what are the core domains? People might all give a similar answer, but when you map it out and you draw directions, how you expect things to change, it can lead to a very different story. So it's good for alignments. The other one, which I find is very useful, is a common situation where a company's got like, we've got 100 problems and 100 solutions, and where do we start? What should we do next? How do we tackle this big long list of analysis paralysis issues? And it's like we've got so many ideas and problems, they just keep kicking them around because no one can make a decision. So
Mm.
a tool like this can be useful because you can map out your domains. You can talk about which problems and solution ideas you've got in each of those domains, and you can work back from your core domains. It's a way to prioritize your problems. So a very simple heuristic is, what's our most important core domain? Which problems and solutions we've got are connected to the core domain? And what if we were to just focus on that core domain, which of those problems would be solved first? So it can be useful to start having those conversations. I think in reality, it's a bit more complicated because sometimes you might have so much legacy debts, technical debt in your legacy supporting domains that you need to fix those before you can work on your core domains. But I think it's always good to just think about what's the core domain? What's the thing that we love to spend the most time on and making that awesome? And just having those difficult conversations about prioritization.
Mm. And I guess just the example there about the supporting domains that enable then the others, that's part of at least your eyes open and you know that, and we'd love to work over here, but we have to do this to enable it. At least it lays it out for it. There's a question coming from the audience, says, in the core domain chart, you recommend mapping where that domain will be in the future. Was that inspired by Wardy Maps?
I would say there's probably lots of subconscious Wardley mapping in here. Yep, definitely. Actually, I think this is a tool that I would use as a gateway drug to Wardley mapping. Core domain charts are a bit easier. I think the learning curve and the terminology is a bit simpler. So once you've done something like this, yeah, definitely use it as a way to get people into Wardley mapping.
Cool. Okay, so if people want to get started, any recommendations? What do they do day one? If someone says, I really want to have a go at that, how do they start tomorrow?
Okay, so probably the best way to start is I created this exercise kata. It's totally free to use. It's just based on a Miro board, and the kata gives you an event storm. So what you have to do is, ideally working in groups in your company, you break the event storm up into domains where you believe the domains are in the company, and then you place these domains on the core domain charts and think about how they will evolve over time. Or you can start straight away on your own company. If you're looking for the kata, it's on my blog. I should have put a link in here,
We'll
but
sort
my
it. So
blog is
we can share anyway. Anyone that's on
okay.
the Slack community anyway, we can get in
Yep.
touch with anyway. But if you want to do a quick plug now and people can note it down, I think we've got a chat function. Where's your blog? What's it under?
It's just ntcoding.co.uk/blog.
Easy. Okay. Cool. So we have only about 30 seconds or so anyway. Is there any final thoughts you want to share to people? Anything else you want to let everybody know?
I would just say, in my experience, the strategic thinking in agile teams is probably one of the next steps we need to take. I think tools like Wardy Mapping are helping that to become more widespread. I know a lot of just engineers now who are getting into Wardy Mapping. So maybe give core domain charts as an easy first step into the world of Wardy Mapping.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. It made it look really accessible. I'm sure lots of people will be after that kata as well to practice.